Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. So good to be back. And we are here with Conservatory Poet Wendy Kieffer. So glad to have you with us. And this is like regular, it's comfortable. This time of year, it's Christmas. Christmas is like days away, which is awesome. We'll get into that. But it feels like poetry has become a regular part of the Lab ecosystem. And I hope everybody who's watching experiences that. I know, does it feel that way to you?
Yeah, I love it. I feel like we're developing this rhythm and this pattern, and we can now just enter in easily. It's great.
Yeah, we talk about, you reminded me today that Lewis, when he wrote Abolition of Man, he was looking ahead to our moment and to men without chests. I was just reading something else about the hollowness of humanity at the edge of modernity and all these things. And Lewis's prescription at the time was, he said, we need to irrigate the deserts. And he was talking about education, but I think it's true. And that's, you reminded me of that today, just the presence of poetry is a part of that irrigating the desert. Again, I hope for all of you who listen that there's actually excitement as we get into that cadence, that there's a few episodes of conversation and stories, but then we come back to poetry and something really beautiful happens. So it feels hopefully more and more comfortable. You've been a pro in the poetry space for a while, but do you get nervous in this space, or is this now you're like, no, that feels natural?
Yeah, I think you're a very easy conversation partner. So I think most people who've been on your podcast would say the same about you. And I think it's the more you do something, the more it just feels, like you said, comfortable, easy.
Yeah. I think it's the medium, to be honest. Like, it's so fireside chatty. Like, podcasts are just an intimate, good thing. And so we get to benefit from that. And personally, I get to benefit from awesome people. I tell everybody, like, if you sit down with amazing people, you can literally just talk to amazing people and amazing goodness comes. So that's how this feels. I don't know.
That's great. That
yeah. And Christmas helps.
Thank you.
It always helps. So favorite holiday. I love Christmas and I love Advent. We've been doing Dr. Amy or Ewing's Advent devotional leading up to it. That's been wonderful. So people have gotten to hear some other voices in kind of bringing out Mary's voice. Yeah. How has your family been preparing for just even the transition from school? Like, you have kids, we have kids, and I feel like my kids there's a push because exams come, the whole thing. How's your family doing this holiday?
I mean, we're doing well. I think it is a lot to juggle. And as you know, we do Hanukkah as well as Christmas. So the world doesn't stop for the Jewish holidays. No. And so we've been doing that late at night. Also enjoying Mary's voice and Advent, and that preparation has been awesome. I highly recommend that book. I've been texting everyone that this is a wonderful way to bring in the season. So we're managing. I think it's just kind of like you're going and going, and that push against the craziness and the busyness, that remembering to slow down, it just becomes more important to be aware of it, because it can really just roll yourself into like a frenzy, and that's not a good way to enter into this season.
Yeah. We're a few days from Christmas Day, and even just recording this, and it'll post like right on the threshold of Christmas Day. So I know everybody listening, you might be wrapping last minute presents, you might be driving to family's home to celebrate. Who knows when this is crossing your path, but I think we all feel it. And that's why I love, again, the regular cadence of poetry. We were just talking before too about creating spaces, whether they're physical spaces in your home for rest and leisure, or if it's literally moments like this where we say, you know what, I'm going to turn my phone off and I'm going to do something that really doesn't seem productive or important. And I'm going to engage in listening and I'm going to let something irrigate the desert. And that's, again, I hope that's how you're approaching this, even if you are driving to the in-laws or wherever you're driving to. So
that's great.
We, last time that we were together, backdrop October 7th, events in Israel, Gaza, Palestine, conflict, tragedy, lots of loss of life. And a poem gave voice, I think, to like, will you be my hiding place? Will I allow you to hide here? It was beautiful. So go back and listen to that episode. But it seems like poems also just help bring us into a moment. And I was watching Justin LaRosa. So we did a podcast with Justin. He runs the Portico here in town.
Yeah.
And even here in Florida, the weather does change and it does get cool. And we forget that if you're used to being without a home and you don't have that shelter and it's 80 degrees, if the weather drops to 40 degrees, that's a drastic impact to a whole population that can, I think, especially here, we forget because it's pretty comfortable no matter what time of day it's not so in your face, that cold, harsh condition. But I saw Justin hosting another conversation just to keep that conversation in front of our mind. And I smiled thinking about Justin because I thought he does such incredible work and we don't talk about it enough. And it's not, we talk about the Bucks, we talk about the Lightning, we talk about sports. There's so much of that. And this time of year, there's so much beauty. And so our parks are full of beauty. Our churches are full of beauty. There's all of those things. And that's a good, we're beauty people here at V3. And then I remember Justin and the beauty of, when I see his events, it might be 20, 30 people gathered around. And it's not something that would get national media attention, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of heaviness in those spaces. And there's people like Justin all over the place that are unrecognized, entering into these really quiet places. The poem you selected today is one of those that kind of just allows us, as Buechner would say, to pay attention to that beauty that we might not pay attention to. So I want to have you tell us about the poet and then take us into the poem.
Yeah, that's a beautiful introduction. It's absolutely spot on. And that is the power of poetry, is to challenge our perception, to help us to see things that are not in our normal purview of our day, to help expose the extraordinary inside the ordinary. That's a poet's job. I mean, it is so easy to do because there are no unsacred places. There are no unholy moments. As you said, we've never met a mere mortal, quoting Lewis. But I think that is the beauty of this poem and ministries like the one you mentioned that allow us to see something extremely beautiful in an unexpected way or an unexpected place. So I chose Hymn to Church Basements by Joan Kwon Glass. She is a Korean-American poet, and I'm just becoming more familiar with her work. She has her latest poetry collection really focuses on grief and loss in the wake of a suicide that her sister and her nephew actually experienced or chose. And so she's just very, very adept at entering into those very difficult, real, painful, traumatic moments. So she does a great job here. And I can just read it and then we can break it down. We'll let the poem just speak for itself. Hymn to Church Basements by Joan Kwon Glass. This world loves a grand cathedral, its righteousness and pulpit, purported sanctuary of redemption, holy spire and stilled saints, history of fire and painted glass. Pews where congregants pray and worship, troubled by questions they hope someone has answers to. They wait on their knees to be forgiven. But where are the songs of praise for church basements? That lower level, that rock-bottom room, sunken and reverent with flickering lights, water-stained ceilings and coffee-stained carpets. Its full moon of chairs that appear every night at 8 o'clock because a crackhead made a commitment. People don't kneel in church basements. Instead, we squat against walls and stand arms crossed in doorways. We sit slouched and messy, look each other in the eyes, say, I am an addict and I don't want to die. And oh, God, is this not a kind of miracle? I prefer my angels banged up and salty, chubby from eating cookies instead of shooting dope. They pull splinters from their wings, hug the newcomer too tightly, shake their heads at me when I don't raise my hand to share. No matter how tough I try to look, No matter how long it takes, they say, keep coming back, kid. Tonight, the addict who overdosed last month, the one who had to be revived with Narcan, is making the coffee. So yeah, this is just an extremely holy moment that she's painting, and a sacred space. And yet it flips it on its head from what we would normally consider a sacred space. And there's something so beautiful happening in something so ugly, and in an environment that's not beautiful to look at. And so she starts off, the world loves a grand cathedral, righteousness and pulpit purported. She has this alliteration, pulpit purported, sanctuary of redemption, holy spire and stilled saints, again with the alliteration. It just helps your soul articulate what is happening, and kind of makes you aware of the sounds in your mouth. I love that about her use of alliteration here. History of fire and painted glass. And so in this opening, they wait on their knees to be forgiven. And this is a beautiful thing too. This is not, there's nothing wrong with this at all. It's gorgeous, but it is, I am focusing on myself. I am kneeling and I have questions and I'm waiting to be forgiven. And she flips it by this beautiful contrast. Let's go down into the basement and look and see what is beautiful there. It's not stained glass. It's not holy spires. It's not this grand thing. And it's not focusing on ourselves, really. These people, these saints, these angels are pouring out, and they're creating this beautiful community. She says that lower level, that rock bottom room, again, with the alliteration and the assonance, you've got rock and room, and bottom and room have that similar ending, sunken and reverent with flickering lights. And that picture is painted so beautifully that we see the fire of the lights, or the flickering lights, and then water-stained ceilings and coffee-stained carpets up and down. No matter where you look, it is not pretty. It has a full moon of chairs. That means it's full. There's a lot of people who need this. There's a lot of people. It's not half full or a small presence. It's a full moon of chairs. And I love that too, because a full moon is also very special. This is a special moment that is happening where this community is assembling for this purpose. And it's as beautiful as a full moon. Every night at 8 because a crackhead made a commitment. And then we have this sort of embodiment. We're not kneeling even. So this contrast again between kneeling, they're squatting and arms crossed, and standing and slouching, and it's sitting and it's messy. But they look each other in the eyes. This is not a proscenium. This is not a stage. This is not something removed. They're close. They're a community living out the messier parts of life together, looking each other in the eyes, being extremely vulnerable and real and even challenged. And she says, is this not a kind of miracle? And I think that's the hunger of the poem. That's the question that she's exploring, that her curiosity is saying, what makes a sacred space? And something very sacred is happening in this space, within this community. And so she says, I prefer my angels banged up and salty, eating cookies instead of shooting dope. Again, a contrast, pulling splinters from their wings. And it's just so beautiful that the people who are ministering in this space, who are showing up and holding space for people who are struggling in this way, are angels, are like angels, are messengers, are ambassadors for God on earth. And hugging too tightly, shaking heads. Again, and we get a real sense and a real picture of what's happening in this basement. She's giving us snapshots of the body language, and we can kind of feel what is underneath that shaking of the head when I don't raise my hand to share. That calling me out. They're not just loving me, but they're also calling me to be truthful, to be vulnerable. And no matter how tough I try to look, no matter how long it takes, this is your one of the long, slow, and deep. I love you, long, slow, and deep. That it doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter what kind of shield I'm putting up. they say keep coming back, and then that obviously insinuates that they're going to be there too, no matter how long it takes.
Mm.
And then just how it ends tonight, the addict who overdosed last month, the one who had to be revived with Narcan, is making the coffee.
Mm.
This is where she all of a sudden hits us with the present. This isn't just happening, you know, in a sort of a general sense, but tonight, this is happening right now. The addict who overdosed last month is making the coffee.
Mm.
And just ending on that line, that is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this poem, and for so many reasons. Her contrast, her driving this beautiful, challenging us on what we would think of as beautiful. It is beautiful to minister in this way. And it's beautiful. These are miracles. These are sacred moments of pouring ourselves out, of saying, when Jesus says, greater works than these you will do because I go to the Father, you know, I always think of, he's speaking of, you know, the number, the actual like amount of things that we can do as an entire body of believers. There's, for every sin, there is a ministry.
Mm-hmm.
There's, you know, that we are the hands and feet, and we're always ministering in that way. So I just love it.
No, it's beautiful. And it ends, I love, is making making the coffee. Talk about the remarkable ordinary, and just that's where it lands.
Yeah.
And I love this. When you shared this, the first thing that hit me was, but where are the songs of praise? This, to me, it didn't hit me as deconstruction or oppositional or antagonistic to, and that's what I loved, is there's a beautiful sense of both and that's what, for me, I long for us to get to this place that it's a yes. That there's something about, you think about St. Patrick's that sits in New York, and it holds space. It's a fortress. It's not moving because it's a built place. And it's a built place, like we talk about often. First we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. There's something that's points to transcendence, and that beauty calls you from street after street after street to arrive at the doorstep and to land here.
Yeah.
And it's an right? That's what we say, up and then in and then out. That it's not a deconstruction against the cathedral.
That's right.
No. It's saying that in the shadow of the wing of this, there's beauty that you haven't seen. And that, I think that's what I caught right away is, again, just a catch, because we do that kind of in our adolescent posture, immaturity of love. We're like, yes, so tear down cathedrals. Right. It should all be basements. No. This basement exists because there's a cathedral above it. Wow. Beautiful. And then let's sing a song of praise to what we may have forgotten is so beautiful about those cathedrals, that it's not necessarily just the stained glass that we all pass by. I love that even the poem starts, the world loves, right?
Yeah.
Like we pass by and celebrate, like, oh, look how grand that is. But the real miracle is that thing has stood there and been a sanctuary for broken people for generations. And it's the unseen who are squatting eye to eye in the basement. So I love that. It's not deconstruction. It's an invitation.
That's right. I love that as well. That's really an astute observation, because it can be, the pendulum can swing too far the other direction, and we lose something that doesn't need to be thrown out. No. And we see this happening all the time in culture, where it's an overcorrection. And I agree, that's not what's happening in this poem, which is what makes it powerful. It is a contrast of saying that, that you, like you said, this is happening, but this is also beautiful. And this is also, so many people struggle, especially this time of year, or know a family member or a friend who's struggling with this time of year. And so I think to be conscious of it, even as we enter these winter months and holiday months, where people feel an exaggerated sense of loneliness sometimes. I mean, I think that is very true. Either isolation or loneliness, or some sadness can creep in this time of year. And just knowing that there's community, there's space to alleviate that loneliness and to, band together and be stronger. I actually have a personal story about a family member who's struggling. And this salty angel, I'll call him, a friend of ours, a new friend of ours, said, I want to go and spend some time with him and tell him my story and just let him know that I'm there for him and that he's not alone. And so he came over to his house and they had lunch and he told his story and he sat with my family member and just, loved him right where he was at and gave him his number and said, let's do this again. Like I'm with you. And I've just met you, but I'm in this moment. It's just like, wow, going in, pursuing, being deliberate, being that angel who shows up to pour out. I assume a lot of these people have gone through it themselves, and now they're comforting with the comfort by which they've been comforted.
I love that. What an invitation to, again, art says pay attention, and so this poem, pay attention, and inevitably, many of us are going to enter into a church, a cathedral, somewhere where our congregation meets, likely in the next few days.
Yeah.
And what an invitation to see the place with fresh eyes, right? Your eye first might go to the stained glass or to all of the beauty, but maybe re-enter your space and just pause for a second and remember where all of those other meetings are happening throughout the year, all of those other things, and that, it's like the manger, the quintessential, like, oh, the stable, right? There's room over there. Just remember the beauty that is incarnated in places all over that space. And then do the move that Wendy just did to say, and there's people that are curating those spaces. There's chubby angels, salty angels that are showing up in those spaces all the time. And you're probably sitting next to them, right? Like the person the crackhead who sets the chairs up because they made a commitment. That person is beautiful and they're inhabiting the congregation and they're the one who makes sure that there's a half moon of chairs at 8:00. How often are our eyes attuned? That's what I love about this poem. Maybe we'll sit down next to someone and say, that's the person who always does lock up and unlock the church and make it possible for that group.
Yeah.
What a great invitation.
Yeah. And it's, I think that we have a heart for this, to serve and to pour out. But if we don't see it in our daily route, in our daily circles, you have to go above and beyond to go and seek it out, to find it, to find where there's the hurting, where I can be, where I can be of service, because it might not be in your everyday view. And so say, where can I help? Where is the need? Where is the hunger? Where am I called to serve that might be not so beautiful, a little uncomfortable, a little messy?
Yeah.
Where can I go and do that?
Yeah. We just talked about the Surgeon General releasing the 2023 report. They always do this kind of report that looks at the major health issue facing the country. And so it's been cardiac disease or cancer or COVID. And this year, the Surgeon General's report is loneliness, that there's an isolation and loneliness epidemic in our culture. And it's interesting, I encourage everybody to read the report, because what the Surgeon General has come out and said, the highest voice for health and wellness in the country has come out and said, more dangerous than cigarette smoking, which you're trying to quit, I applaud you, and it's difficult, and that's not good. And eating poorly, that's not good. Drinking too much, all these things, right?
Yeah.
But the Surgeon General said the most devastating thing on our radar right now is loneliness and isolation. And as you read the report, it's just amazing to watch where they call out the social fabric that's been eroded and is disappearing. And this is a report of alarm saying, pay attention.
Right.
Because if that half moon of chairs isn't set up, if there's not a basement for that place, if every bit of those institutional expressions of community start to just dissipate, then what is left is the philosophical place we've found ourselves, autonomous, singular, isolated.
Right.
And that's we can't sustain under that. But part of the recovery is to say, I see it. And then to do what Wendy's asking, which is there a next question? Because I can tell you that there's probably an 8:00 meeting at your church that would love to have you help set up chairs. But it's uncomfortable.
Right. And yet it might be surprisingly comfortable in the sense of, I have a friend who goes to Celebrate Recovery. And she doesn't have, I think it's like habits, hangups, and hurts. So you don't have to have a major addiction, but you have something. And you go, and she said, I'm starting to prefer it to my regular church service because everyone is so real and so vulnerable. And so we're really loving each other and going deeper maybe than you can sometimes get. But I mean, it's again, not an either or, it's a both and. Yeah. But it's interesting for her to say that because there's something we get from that experience as well, no matter where we fall on the spectrum of hangups and hurts and, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that catch that you just made of saying that it is, that's why we always say upward. There is this encounter, Augustine, I'm restless till I find my rest in thee, and I was made for another. All of this joy that comes in relationship with God, expressed, not wrongly, when I'm looking at the back of your head and we're in rows at church and we're not thinking about your story or my story, we're thinking about his story.
That's right?
Yeah. And all of us together orient upward like that. We can say yes to that. But in this poem, it's so great. But what about the church basements where we look eye to eye?
That's
and
right.
I would just say many people probably are feeling that sense of isolation and loneliness. And they're saying, yeah, I'm in that 2023 report from the Surgeon General and I have a church. What say you? And I would say, I think it's an invitation to consider the relational reality that's taking place in your worship context.
Yeah.
Probably there's some things to explore there. And where are the spaces where there's an invitation for you to be eye to eye with some other people? And I think that sometimes we miss them because we think they'll be uncomfortable. But like your friend, they say, no, that's what my soul needed.
That's right. And like you said, that we can't give what we don't have without orienting ourselves first into worship and asking God to fill our cup. Then we are coming to one another with an empty cup. It's not as useful, or as we pour out what's been poured in. Yeah. So they do exist together, but it's, I think more often than not, I think people think of it as just the one.
Yeah.
And it's really a both.
Can I ask you a really basic question?
Sure.
Okay. And this is what I get to do because it's the safe space, right? You mentioned right away, you called out alliteration.
Yeah.
You called out some things that are unique to poetry.
Yeah.
That I also get excited about time with you and reading poetry and just the words that come, because we may not use language like grand cathedral, righteous pulpit, purported redemption. You know, those are not necessarily words that are in our normal cadence anymore. However, I think that there's an invitation, even as we read. This has happened in my own life. The more I read poetry, the more my prosy emails have a hint of beauty.
Yes.
Because I may choose a word I wouldn't normally choose, or I could say something this way, but I might say it slant because it can make it beautiful when it lands in somebody's inbox rather than just mechanical. But some of us don't even have the language to know what you were calling out. So would you help me right there? You called out right away. You said, hey, this is in there. What did you mean?
Yeah, I think, there's poetic devices are your metaphors, your similes, your assonance, your consonants, your alliteration. And even if you didn't know what they were, you would feel them as you're reading. They impact you. But to call them out and to just have a moment to say what they are, I think that's also part of what's nice about breaking a poem down, because you realize the power that they hold when you can call them what they are. So you have, again, spire, stilled saints. You have spire and fire, which are an internal rhyme. Painted glass. You have, again, that S sound. And my favorite part of alliteration is that it builds a rhythm. It builds a rhythm of sound. Mm-hmm. And we realize all of a sudden these are not just words on a page. They're living in my body. Mm-hmm. And so then there's a fun kind of rhythmic building of sound that swirls around and actually is a part of what makes it the spell, right? Yeah. And that rhythm is really important for poetry. So we have, again, those would be your internal rhymes. She does it again on Rock Bottom Room. Even sunken and reverent with flickering lights. I have sunken and flick. So I have these consonants that share a similar sound. and almost create, again, link together and create that little spell that wraps around us as we're reading. Yeah, and she just, I mean, again, the contrast is really beautiful in this poem. Up, down, again, upstairs and downstairs, coffee and stains and water stains, and just this whole play off of where we are as far as space. We're way up, we're way down. We're on the ceiling, we're on the floor. This contrast, even between cookies and dope.
Yeah.
Just
I love it at the end, that contrast of tonight last month.
Great.
So I'm in the moment and I'm in my memory. And then that second line, the one who had to be revived with Narcan, is offering a stimulant. I mean,
right.
Charged with, my life was saved by this revitalization of my life, and now here I am offering coffee to someone to wake them up. And
and that's how it works. It's so beautiful. I love that scripture. Those who've been forgiven much love much. Yeah. You see that the ones who are the salty angels showing up. The one I mentioned to you, my friend. It's the same for him. He's been forgiven so much that he just loves so much.
Yeah.
And it pours out of that reservoir of love.
Yeah.
This kid's exciting about making coffee. He's excited to be doing this.
You know what I love about this poem, and the fact that you brought it up for us to think about and to consider, is anybody who's been in or around maybe a group like this, or they themselves have benefited from these spaces or participated in these spaces. This poem is really well written in the sense that they've embodied this, they have lived this, because that's exactly how these rooms feel, how these basements feel. Like, I can say yes to that. And so many people who go, yeah, I've been in that room.
Yeah.
I've been in that room. And what I love about it is, yes, this is not a new story. Like, there has been brokenness and addiction and people setting up half moon chairs to really struggle through. There's been a come back again kid. That's been said so many times that we can reflect on it with poetry. And so if you're your family, if you're sitting there listening to this podcast and it feels really fresh and maybe really scary, and you're like, this is new territory. I've never traveled this landscape with my kid that is now facing opioid addiction or this or that. I've never been here before.
Yeah.
I just want you to know that others have, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are not alone in this contrast and this tension between, I know the cathedral part, but now I'm getting introduced to this entire other thing, and it's really hard and really just want you to know we're reading a poem because that's existed for a long time.
That's
and
right.
People have walked these trails and these spaces, and
that's right.
God is in there and has sustained people and revived people, and there's little chubby angels in those spaces, so you're not alone, right?
That's right. And that's the main thing too, even for those listening who might be struggling with addiction or, just the long-term habits, hurts, and hangups. The idea is this community, this community that bands together for this purpose is so strong and so important to find that community, to go above and beyond, to break from the isolation or the loneliness, and to find the people that will call you out, support you, look you in the eye, link arms with you, walk with you.
Yeah. I hope it can be some wind, just kind of, you think about breathing on the embers and strengthening what remains. I love the church. I love the church. Yeah. And I love and hope that we talk about post-secular, post-Christian culture, American landscape, and just a question, even institutionally, like, should we tear them all down and start over, right? It feels pretty bad. So let's get rid of libraries. Let's get rid of Congress. Let's, January 6th, 2020, and I'm a no to that. I'm a strengthen what remains posture. And I think, I want to breathe on the embers of the cathedrals and say, praise God that around every corner, on every block, we've got churches. And let's remember that they are spaces where these things are taking place, and where there's incredible soaring melodies of adoration, and the heart is rekindled and awakened by beauty and joy and transcendence. And there is long, slow, deep work that seems like we're taking one step forward, 10 steps back.
Yep.
And this is the beauty of being the church. And the world needs it. I mean, again, contrast with that Surgeon General's report. So maybe you just attend a church, and tonight's just an invitation for you to thank God that that's a reality and to lean in a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe you are, as Wendy said, like facing addiction. And I would just say there are great communities. Celebrate Recovery is a great community.
Yeah.
The AA communities are great communities.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like you said, churches are just known for it. Even living in New York as long as I did, when the cardboard boxes that are like makeshift homes, they were always lining the church steps. The church steps always had the cardboard boxes. The homeless would use them. Or obviously, many of the churches had ways to bring them in as well, but those that didn't, they would still knew that they were safe and that space was a space they could use. Those church steps. I mean, even that. But I just think that it's a beautiful thing to say Jesus identified himself with the poorest among us. He went into the tax collectors, to the those who were pushed away, outcast from society, those who were hurting, and really identifies himself with them. When you gave a cup of water to the thirsty, when you visited the person in prison, when you were loving to the least of your brothers, that was me. I don't know if you saw this sculpture. I think it started in Canada, but it's moved around. It's a sculpture that someone made of a park bench and a homeless person. Have you seen this? And a homeless person laying on the park bench, draped, and you can't.
Jesus,
and the only thing that you can see is the pierced hands and the pierced feet. Yeah. And you just say, this is when you help the least among me, or the ones who might be considered too far gone or too ugly, too much of a mess. When you go to the least of these, you do it for me. Yeah. So he just flips it on its head, especially in his day when he saw you're giving the best seats, away to those, with the most money. You're not even seeing the least among you. Jesus came to flip that all on its head and say, these people in this basement, these people struggling, this kid making the coffee, he's so valuable. He means so much. The world,
Yeah, there are no mere mortals. You started with that. And you've never met an ordinary person.
No.
It's amazing. Yeah. That sculpture you're describing, there's one at the Portico. This artist has placed these in multiple cities, and we have one in Tampa. Yeah, so you go to the Portico and you can find homeless Jesus sculpture, and it's beautiful, and it is disruptive because you walk up and you go, oh, I assume I know what that is. Right. And then you see and you go, oh, wow, right? Wow. And what a great thing there, too, about art and high art and the investment to call us to pay attention. So good.
And how you can, I'd love that was full circle when you mentioned the Portico and that.
Wild.
It was neat. Yeah. But like when something like that, a sculpture is made, how many sermons it's preaching, how it crystallizes an entire posture of how you live your life, an orientation to the suffering of those around us. It's just so powerful in one sculpture.
Yep. Yeah, it's so
millions
powerful.
Of words.
There's so much there. We'll keep having this conversation, and I hope everybody you're learning, maybe in recovering the ability to enjoy space and time like this, to let a poem call us to pay attention, to think about a sculpture, and again, not for the sake of the thing itself, but so that it leads us to the heart of real, true, good, beautiful, true God who says there are no mere mortals. Yeah. It's a beautiful, we talk about human flourishing and life to the full. That's what it is. It's to live with that orientation, and it's up and it's in and it's out. And so thank you for this. This is really, really beautiful. And as always, we'll end up closing with poetry, but again, I want you to know we've started to do this more, but if you're listening to this episode and you are struggling with addiction, or you don't know what to do, or you don't have community, we may not be the most helpful, but what we can say that we will do is make a connection. And so you can email me, Zach, Z-A-C-H, at viewvivo.com, info@viewvivo.com. I think Wendy's at View. Any of us, just pick a name and shoot it to viewvivo.com, and we'll try to make a connection. And I just encourage you. So if you need help, if you need something, at least maybe just know this, you're not alone. You can start with just sending an email, and we'll try to connect you or put you in touch with somebody who's in your part of the world. That's number one. That's right. Number two, I can't go without saying it, and I know we got to be careful on time, but I want to say this. This is called Hymn to Church Basements. And I know it's year end, and they say most nonprofit giving happens within the last 24 hours of a year. And I don't know where you're listening to this, but I feel compelled to say St. Patrick's Cathedral exists in New York City because people gave real treasure to construct a sacred space that would not need to serve an economic good. Yeah. And even the fact that there are church basements that can function. And I have been in the place where you need a space to host that meeting with Half Moon chairs. And you can't pay $500 for an event space. And you can't, it just deconstructs the ability to help people without space. You need a place to do that. Even if it's got coffee stained carpet and old water worn stairs, and it's still the most incredible gift when somebody says, you can use our church. And so I'll tell you what, if you're listening to this and you're in a part of the world and you have extra resource, praise God that there are church basements that are not, you don't need to rent them. They're available. And there's maybe a little resource for somebody to buy that coffee to make sure that that meeting can have coffee. I just don't want us to forget that it's not just showing up in those spaces, but it's making those spaces possible. Yeah. And we can't forget that, because we do lose it, and we can take it for granted, and we can coast on the fumes of other people's investment for so long that then churches start being shuttered, and they start turning into hotels or restaurants, and these sacred places that have these quiet basements, they don't exist. And as this poem says, they're places of beauty. They're miracle places. So that's right. Thank you. This has been awesome. Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Will you close it with just taking us back through it? Let's read Hymn to Church Basements.
Hymn to Church Basements by Joan Kwon Glass. This world loves a grand cathedral, its righteousness and pulpit, purported sanctuary of redemption, holy spire and stilled saints, history of fire and painted glass, pews where congregants pray and worship, troubled by questions they hope someone has answers to. They wait on their knees to be forgiven. But where are the songs of praise for church basements? That lower level, that rock-bottom room, sunken and reverent with flickering lights, water-stained ceilings and coffee-stained carpets, its full moon of chairs that appear every night at 8 because a crackhead made a commitment. People don't kneel in church basements. Instead, we squat against walls and stand arms crossed in doorways. We sit slouched and messy, look each other in the eyes, say, I am an addict and I don't want to die. And oh God, is this not a kind of miracle? I prefer my angels, banged up and salty, chubby from eating cookies instead of shooting dope. They pull splinters from their wings, hug the newcomer too tightly, shake their heads at me when I don't raise my hand to share. No matter how tough I try to look, no matter how long it takes, they say, keep coming back, kid. Tonight, the addict who overdosed last month, the one who had to be revived with Narcan, is making the coffee.